Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for attending today. My name is Marty Mades. I'm the Senior Vice President for Polyfuse. I'm also a Reusable Packaging Association board member and an active member of RPA's Technology Working Group. Really thrilled to be your moderator today, and I'd like to personally thank the panel for making the time to be here. As technology-enabled reusable packaging is becoming more commonplace, manufacturers and end users are seeking insights. As a matter of fact, they're asking that we all become smarter on this topic. They're demanding it, in fact. So if you're in the audience today because you're hoping to gain information about how technology is supporting the track and trace or management of reusable assets, well, you came to the right place. Because today's panel includes industry professionals from around the globe, and they're here to share their expert opinion on this topic. But our hope is that today's discussion is going to be more than just theory, because in response to the questions, we're going to try to provide as much real-world experience as we can. So I prepared some questions, but we also want to hear from members of the audience. So if you have a question, please get it ready, and we promise we're going to do our best to get to you, time permitting, towards the end of today's discussion. One last thing I need to mention is that a video copy of today's panel discussion will be available on the Reusable Packaging Association website. That's reusables.org. If you haven't been to the website, you should, because once you get there, you're going to find RPA has done an excellent job to assemble white papers and other very useful information. Just remember that once you're there, to click on Resources and navigate to the Technology Hub. Okay, without further delay, let's get started with our panelist introductions. Sarush?
Thank you, Marty. Sarush Honori, founder and CEO of System Loco. We're a technology company that specializes in monitoring assets in transit. So typically, initially, high-value assets such as your Xboxes and your electronics, your Dysons, your Sonys, these types of products. And now we're moving more into embedding some of the tracking technology into packaging, which is why we're keen to be here and happy to be part of this panel.
Thank you, Sarush.
Nice. Hey, everybody. My name's Dan Veal. I'm the CEO of a company called Wave Reaction, which provides software and related services largely to OEMs, enabling them to track and manage big fleets of returnable assets. What that actually entails in practice is like asset tracking on a serialized basis, fleet management, a lot of times warehouse management, and a bunch of ancillary services. So we, configure these solutions for our OEM clients, and we've been around for about 20 years. We track tens of millions of RTIs today, and excited for the conversation.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Heidenberg. I'm the Director of Marketing for Innotech Group. We're a German label manufacturer from the very far north of Germany. And among other identification solutions, we specialize in in-mold and RFID in-mold labeling solution with focus on returnable transport items.
Thank you again for being here. Just to mention Polyfuse, if you don't know what it is, it's a unique labeling technology for polymer materials. All of us will be available. If you'd like to come see us afterwards, we'd hope to see you. Let's go through some questions. Dan, I'm going to start with you on this first question, okay? So when you work with a customer to identify the business problem that they're having and that they're trying to solve, what are some of the questions they should consider when selecting technology? And furthermore, what are some of the insights and benefits they can hope to obtain from the solution?
Yeah, this is a good question, and it's an important one because I'll tell you, we talk with prospective clients every day that come to us with kind of a vague feeling that there's a problem. They have fleets of returnables or fleets of high-value assets that they own, that sit on their balance sheet, but they don't have any tracking mechanism in place. And so they come to us and say, hey, we'd like to do better, but we can't really wrap our arms around what precisely that means because there's no tracking mechanism to tell them whether they're doing a good or a bad job at present. So, getting to wrapping your arms around the problem that you're trying to solve is the big thing that you're trying to do when you're engaging initially with a prospective vendor. And the big dilemma that we encourage folks to address early on when they're exploring options is, what's your current state? What problem are you maybe trying to solve for today? But then how, if you're successful, is that going to change tomorrow? For example, you might have 50,000 returnables today. That presents a certain set of economic conditions that might push you to outfit your supply chain with certain technology. But if you're successful and that 50K fleet is going to grow to 500,000, that might have a different solution. And so thinking about what tomorrow will look like if you're successful is going to set you up to do a great job today without fitting a solution. That's kind of how we try to drive the conversation. The insights, I can talk for a long time about that, but it's a lot of the KPIs with any high value asset that you'd want to know. Where is it? What's your loss rate? How is it dwelling across nodes, et cetera? And by putting in place the right tracking mechanisms, you can learn all of that and a bunch of things you probably didn't expect to learn.
Excellent. Hopefully some of these responses are going to generate some questions from the audience too, but thank you, Dan. Sarush, a similar question for you. So what's the most common question that a potential user of technology solution asks you? But more importantly, what should they be asking you?
So I think the most common question we get is, how much does this cost? The first question is always about price, where really the key thing is it's what will it save? What benefit will it provide? So trying to understand their current business processes, the problems they actually have. And then the technology is not really about the cost of the components or trying to specify what they believe is important from a functional perspective. It's often trying to express the problems, understanding their existing processes, the systems that they use, and then how they can be optimized to deliver them value rather than create another layer of cost.
Excellent. Kirsten, let's ask you a question here. So what are some of the considerations that companies should keep in mind when selecting the right technology, say an RFID label? So how do you help them solve their business challenges, like when they're selecting, say, an RFID label?
I can just agree with what Sarush said. We always tell our customers it's really important that you think about the process before you actually choose the technology. Often RFID may be the right decision for you, but there's also supply chains that require a mix of RFID and barcode. So different process chains require different technology. And once you know about your process and you're getting closer to choosing the technology, you might want to think about a couple of other things as well. For example, does that technology that you chose, will it deliver the best data precision that you need for your process? For example, do you want to track on item level or do you want to track on case level? That's one thing. And I have to peek here a little bit, but
it's okay.
Also, you have to think about scalability. Is that technology that you choose, is it scalable? And will it fit into your infrastructure that you already have at your company? Yeah. Also, the compliance, of course. How could I forget compliance? Are you ready for that? And last but not least, of course, as Sarush said, you have to think about cost versus ROI.
Excellent. Yeah, as a fellow label supplier at Polyfees, we deal with a lot of end users, and they're getting the label from us, but one of the common questions is, well, what do I do next? And so we don't just want to be a label supplier. We've created a whole ecosystem of hardware, people who help us with the scanning, software, guys like Dave Horvat in the audience will help with technology. So not just having the label, not just being able to scan the label, but having access to that data and doing something with it. Excellent. Let's see here. Sarush, let's start with you on this question. So what should a company consider when dealing with potentially large amounts of data?
With large amounts of data?
Large amounts. And we might be talking about big companies, got a lot of assets.
Yeah.
What do you consider when dealing with large amounts of data?
Yeah, I mean, the data on its own has it has some value, but little value. I think you've got to see what problems you're trying to solve. So ultimately, you've got systems that they may currently use, ERP systems, TMS systems, and it's, do they need another system? Can that data be integrated into what they already have? What are the insights that they're trying to gather from this data? And trying to look at effectively where the value would be. Obviously, when you've got huge amounts of data coming in, you've also got to look at how that data can be structured. Everyone's talking about AI and being able to use AI to sort of gather benefits, but AI works on one, high quality data. So it's making sure that what you have is correct. And secondly, the structure of that data that you put in to make it easy to be able to use and to have models running on it.
Excellent. Dan, similar question. So has Wave Reaction had experience in this? How has Wave Reaction worked with other companies to create insights from that data? And what was the processes you followed?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our primary reasons for being, right? Is we exist at this edge where we're collecting data from tech-enabled assets, containers, racks, et cetera. and clients partner with us to understand important insights from that data. And so it's kind of our bread and butter. And I can tell you that what we think a lot about is what Sarush was just saying. This notion of you can collect all the data in the world, but without context and without structure, it's not very useful. The way that you get that context and structure effectively is by, if you're a vendor or if you're an OEM who's looking at vendor partners to potentially bring on, the more you can educate the vendor about your process, what your goals are, how at the end of the day you're going to be measured by your boss or by the director who oversees IT or something like that. What success is defined as, if you communicate that to the vendor, you can pick a good partner, because that information informs the context that's applied to the data that you collect, and thereby will take a bunch of data and turn it into a bunch of assets. And what we find is if you do that effectively at the front end, you'll solve for the problems that you're setting out to solve for. Maybe you want to reduce loss rate. We have clients that come to us and say, I have 1 million RTIs, I think I'm losing 15% a year. I'm not going to be allowed to buy anymore until that goes below 5. You might come solve that problem, but if you set up a really good data collection machine, you can then solve ancillary problems as well with that same data set and the same tools. So upfront effort, a lot of collaboration yields more insights, generally speaking.
Good. Real world experience. Kirsten, I touched on this a little bit ago, but when selecting a technology-based solution, what are some of the resources available to help some of the customers manage and process all that data? What's your experience there with Inotech?
My answer is probably very similar to what the gentleman here said before. So optimal data management for every IoT-based object always involves securely recording physical tracking data throughout the whole process at every tracking point, and then transferring it seamlessly to a central database. And once that data is communicated to the central database, for example, as a digital twin, then you can organize and manage that data and transfer it to a downstream ERP system or any other management processes.
Great, thank you. Sarush, another question for you. So how does an organization move beyond just interesting insights and move into actions that can affect their business and supply chain?
That's a good question. It's probably best to answer it with an example. So we've worked more recently with a large convenience store. They came to us with a problem saying that they have a pilferage problem with the delivery of goods in their totes. And that seemed to be the biggest problem that they had. When we got working with them, we sort of realized that actually that's one of the problems they have. Another major problem is that every time there's a delivery, people at the convenience store are having to open up every single tote, check all of the items in each of the totes, tick them off the list to be able to make sure that that delivery is completed in full and there's nothing wrong with the goods being transported. So you end up with this discovery process that you're doing with clients, where you sort of go through and you really understand what are the steps that they take and they do, where do they spend time, how can technology help them. In this particular example, we ended up working with partners within the RPA, so with UDS group, and who I believe use Inotech as well for labels. So it's an interesting combination of how this sort of RPA enables you to work with partners as well to solve problems. And we ended up designing a tote which would identify when the lid was open, if there was impact, if there was drops. And that was then used to be able to provide a simple solution for the store manager. So by scanning any tote in a shipment, you'll be able to validate the entire shipment. So a quick, easy sort of mechanism to solve their problem. At the same time, you're solving their pilferage problem, but really the biggest issue that they had wasn't that. It was the efficiencies that they have within their closed loop supply chain. So yeah, really trying to work closely again with the clients, understanding their flows, the business processes, where the bottlenecks are, where is it inefficient, allows a technology partner then to come in to try and help solve issues which affect their bottom line.
Excellent. Yeah, you mentioned working closely with a supplier, whoever you're dealing with. Really, it's trying to build a business case. We found at Polyfuse, working with a customer, listening to what their problem is, maybe there's a secondary process they could eliminate using us. Maybe something else they didn't even think of. So I really think that's important to gather the information and listen. Dan, similar for you, what are some of the best practices that you can share that have worked well, but more importantly, what have you seen go wrong? What has not worked well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Suresh hit the nail on the head, right? Engagement and open lines of communication with the client or the vendor, depending on which seat you're in, is pretty critical. I'll give a quick example. Like, one of our clients is a global industrials OEM, and we solved the returnable management problem for them. But of course, I'm sure this isn't unique. The last year has led to a lot of net new tariff considerations for them, new costs, new concerns, a lot of uncertainty, and so being in that position as a partner, not just a simple indirect vendor, enabled us to hear their problems and help solve them. And one of the problems they brought to us was, hey, we have a huge fleet of racks that are moving cross-border constantly. And as a result of that and net new tariffs, we have a pretty massive and growing amount of exposure. And so because we thoughtfully designed a program, because we have a nice relationship with this client, we were able to very quickly reformat the data, put together a dashboard so that they can now see, hey, 15% of my steel racks are out of the country right now and they need to get back in the country in 6 weeks, or else I'm going to spend $100,000 that I don't feel like spending. So that sort of thing is a total function of what Suresh was talking about.
Right.
Definite best practice. I think where things can go wrong is I would also say it's a best practice to involve more stakeholders, but the more folks you involve, the more conflict can exist, right? Some folks may want to purely optimize for, let's get as much of the fleet online as possible so that so we never have a line down risk issue. There's returnable packaging everywhere, everybody has it. But then, somebody in the material flow side of the equation might say, hey, that's causing problems, that's gumming up the works, and maybe presenting net new but different line down risks. So bringing more people to the table earlier so that you can avoid a situation where one person's goal and incentives aren't in direct conflict with another's is super important. And that's common because returnable packaging touches kind of everything in the supply chain for a lot of OEMs.
I'm glad you mentioned the multiple stakeholders, because often you'll have a champion, but you're forgetting to bring other people in. So great. I mean, we're talking about not just theory, but real world examples. So this is excellent.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears here. We're going to talk about regulatory, in particular, packaging and packaging waste reduction, PPWR, and extended producer responsibility. Now, obviously, Kristen, Europe is way ahead of the US in this, so you have something to say about this. How is technology-enabled reusable packaging going to support these regulatory requirements in the future?
Yeah, well, I just sat here when Bob Klimko talked about PPWR, and I think many people worldwide don't know yet how much of an impact PPWR will actually have, and how important it is that you enable your packaging with technology. Because only then, once you have once you have enabled your packaging, you have traceability. And you need traceability to always know where your assets are in the supply chain. So that is actually really, really important. But there are also other aspects to that. Once you have your assets trackable, your logistics will be optimized, and then you can meet your reuse targets, which, of course, according to PPWR, is really, really important. Once you have your objects tracked, it enables cost transparency for all your EPR reporting. So that's also important. And all the data that you get, you have audit-ready data once you can track your object. So that's priceless, I guess, right? You would know better than I do. But last but not least, all these assets that you track now, they will help you manage your resources much better, because then you will learn much quicker where your materials actually flow.
Yeah. With the extended producer responsibility, I think about recyclers. Any recyclers in the audience? I would like to hear from you. I mean, that comes up a lot with end of life, having to deal with labels, having to deal with things like that, RFIDs in particular. So we will see some recyclers later in there, but thank you, that's good insight. We were talking about AI earlier, so that's a big topic, and we should touch on that. Dan, how is AI, in your opinion, going to further support technology-enabled reusable packaging in the future? What do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big topic of conversation. Tim spoke a lot about it at the onset of the programming today. I think he did quite a nice job, by the way. I think it's almost the premise is flipped a little bit. I think tech-enabled returnable packaging can really support the quality of AI benefits that we derive as vendors and OEMs. What I mean by that is Suresh, you made this point earlier, AI is a function of high-quality data, right? If you just have horrible data, I don't know about you, but I don't really want to know what insights an LLM has for me if the things that it's ingesting are low quality. It's probably going to tell us to do the wrong thing. If we have tech-enabled packaging, we then, and thoughtfully design data collection protocols and databases, we then can collect and future-proof our organizations via the data collection such that what AI looks like today will be more beneficial, but more importantly, what it looks like tomorrow, 5 years from now, is going to be just as compatible with our organization. So I think that to win in an ever-changing AI-driven landscape as an OEM, you shouldn't set such a lofty ambition to be on the bleeding edge of the new technology. I think you should just focus on infrastructure, focus on data collection and hygiene. And then no matter what the technology is, you'll be set up for success.
Yeah, I was speaking with an end user in Canada a couple of years ago, and their concern was that things were moving so quickly with regard to track and trace that were they picking the right solution? With RFID as in that example, is it going to be what everyone's using? So people are moving quickly, and maybe AI helps us to predict that. But that's an excellent feedback. Thank you. Suresh, I'm going to ask you a question about the use of digital twins. So digital twins is often talked about in supply chains. How will this technology solution enable future trends and insights and actions, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think one thing that we're seeing a lot is customers that we talk to, they're not necessarily keen on having an additional platform or system to use. So we've seen a trend that there was a lot of additional platforms there. Now we're seeing a movement towards having that integrated into their existing client systems, their ERP systems, their TMS systems. And it's interesting because some of those systems, although that's the aim, they're not geared up to be able to take the data or be able to make value out of that data. So I think there's a transformation happening where there's still going to be an additional platform, but there will be integrations from some of the actions and events that are seen pushed into existing client systems which they're currently using. So I think it'll be less standalone and more integrated with their existing client enterprise systems that they use. And that's a trend that we're currently seeing when we speak into clients. They're always asking, well, how can I make use of this based upon the fact that we use SAP or we use Oracle and all these sort of things.
Excellent. I think we're doing really good on time here, Todd, so we're moving along.
Good.
I want to open it up to see if there's any questions from the audience. Are we just passing a mic around, Todd? Is that audience questions? If not, we can have some other topics, but anybody? Amanda's going to get the microphone. See if we do. And there are some other topics we can touch on, but I just wanted to see if there is. One thing that I just wanted to make note of, and we didn't really have this as a question, but theft, crime, and you guys are probably aware of the CORCA legislation that just recently passed, right? Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. I think a lot of what we just talked about with track and trace is really becoming a bigger topic. But the one question I had for the panel I wanted to put out there is, if there's just one thing, if you had to just suggest one thing to a company that they should consider when investing in technology-enabled reusable packaging, what is that one thing? I'm going to start with Kirsten, and we're going to work from the end there. If there's just one thing they should consider, what is it, Kirsten?
Thank you for asking. Well, we think it's actually two things, but they're strongly connected. So if you have technology-enabled packaging, it should always deliver a clear benefit for you and your customers. So find that benefit and find your worst pain point and combine them.
Excellent. One thing. Dan, one thing.
Yeah, one thing I would say, if you're thinking about investing in this kind of technology or tech-enabled returnables, the piece of advice I'd give you is just pick a path and start moving. If you think about returnables and the related operations, there's a lot going on. You can try to solve for freight costs, you can solve for loss rates, you can solve for supplier compliance or regulatory compliance. And that can be overwhelming. We see analysis paralysis a lot. Those are all great things to do. Pick one, do it, design a pilot that's executable, and then learn from it. And then, you'll start down the path and your business will get better.
Excellent. Yeah. So, Ruth, same question for you. What's the one thing?
I have to agree with both the others panelists here. I think you've got to look at what is the big problem that you've got. And again, working with the partner to be able to solve that problem. So how do I really create value that's going to impact my bottom line? I think technology is there as an enabler that can effectively provide value. Ultimately, it's got to be able to generate ROI, and that's and you've got to make use of the RPA, talking to partners, talking to people that can try and help, and see if, like you said, there can be a trial that can solve that problem. So really, what is the big problem, and then can I get it solved?
Excellent. Well, I get to chime on this one for, question? Well, I'll just chime in on this and we'll get to your question. Our one thing at Polyfuse, and we talk to a lot of end users, it's the label itself and its inability to separate from the asset when you use polymer fusion. A lot of things we've been talking about, it's dependent that the label is still there with the asset. So if you lose it, you can't scan it, the track and trace isn't there. So for us, the one thing is preventing label separation from the asset. That's our value proposition. Please, you had a question.
Yeah, so we're looking at introducing returnable transfer packaging for our company, and we're doing trials, but it's really hard getting up to the CEO level of why this is important. Like, obviously we can see it, but the amount of people to invest in it, and IT and other groups to get involved in it, that's the hard part. So how do we get all that together and make them understand? We're doing costing, we see that, but what about the IT and the CEO level? Like, how do we sell this better?
I think that goes back to Dan's point about having all the stakeholders. Most certainly it has to start from top down with big changes like that, but is there somebody who wants to go first? Dan, you want to expand on that?
I would say that that's like a problem we run into a lot, and it's not easy. And sometimes what we do is, we'll talk with folks like yourself and say, all right, is there an expenditure level below which we can get a pilot done really quickly so that then you can have real data to present to management or leadership? You got to get kind of tactical, and because there are a lot of stakeholders, and it's not always easy to get on the C-level agenda and make this case. You've got to find data where you can, find case studies where you can, and then make it a simple ROI equation and present it. But super challenging, and it's, of course, you always want to start at the top, but if you can't get the time of day from that person, you have to find other means. But a lot of times we'll design $20,000 6-month pilots that don't require any sign-off. We proactively engage with IT and make sure they're comfortable, and then we go. You got to be a little scrappy sometimes.
So, Rooster, Kristen, any real-world experience here?
Yeah, I mean, it's that proof of value, trying to make sure you can get to that point as quickly as possible. I think there's also, when we talk about reusable packaging, it's quite complicated because there's one business model which is actually getting the turns out of your packaging and reducing your loss rates. There's another business model which is the goods that you're transporting are probably even worth more than the packaging themselves. So what additional value can you provide to your clients based on this technology? So getting that proof of value, working with a partner to be able to do it, like Dan said, in a small, easy way that's easy to sign off, and then using that evidence to be able to then get greater buy-in is probably the way forward.
Any experience here, Kirsten, when you're seeing an organization and they're trying to get buy-in? Experience?
Yeah, I was actually gonna tell you real quick about a project that we just recently did in Germany. Plant trays. So those little trays that you can get at wholesalers like Home Depot with all your geraniums and whatnot in them, they're all single use. And now we have PPWR looming above us, and we have that initiative in Europe that we want to replace those single-use trays. And of course we had the question, cost, it's going to be so expensive. But we found out that actually after the third time that the tray circles in the supply chain, it's more economic than making single-use plastic trays. So of course I don't know whether that will be the case for you, but I think that's really something that needs to be considered. It sounds a lot at the beginning, but it may not be as expensive in the end.
It's a really good question. My advice too would be for your organization that there's really a whole buying process to that, lots of different components. Trying to find somebody, partners or a couple of partners, who can help you outline that process very clearly so you can present it back at the high level, the C-suite level, see that there's an ROI, there's a reason for doing it, and then it should be there. Like if it's on paper and it makes sense, hopefully you get the buy-in from the top on down. Hope we answered your question. It's really good feedback. Amanda, anybody else raise their hand, or are there any other questions? I think we're doing really good on time. I guess if that's not it, I'm going to say thank you again to the panelists for making the time to be here. Most of us will be available if you'd like to come and speak with us at our booth. We'd love to hear from you. I know Tim and Todd will want me to mention too, before we close, that if you're not already doing so, please follow the Reusable Packaging Association on LinkedIn. It's going to help you to stay up to speed on the latest trends. A lot of great benefits from RPA. If you're not a member, you should consider being a member. Excellent groups, and it really is an organization that's standing for this industry and making some things happen. So let's hear it for our panelists for being here today.